Welcome to Project Natter. This is the Red, White and Blue show. Joining me in this video is Richard Day and Richard Brain to discuss illegal immigration and the COVID restrictions. But before we get started, if this is your first time here, please show your support for freedom of speech by hitting that subscribe button. I get heavily censored by the lefties and taken out of suggested videos. And we're live. Thanks very much. Two Richards joining me.
Afternoon.
Good to see you.
Good to see you both.
I'm Richard.
So let's get the party started. We'll talk about the influx of all these illegal immigration, or illegal immigrants, I say, economic migrants even. As you know, we started a petition online to get people to sign a petition, download the letter, to bombard Priti Patel with letters of protest. I received a letter back from Priti Patel, a 3-page letter. The long and short of it is, she's saying her hands are tied and she can do absolutely nothing until we leave the EU. What do you reckon?
I've already spoken my mind about this, which is that I haven't heard any legal objection to collecting people in the Channel and putting them on board a cruise ship and taking them down to, I thought ideal would be South Georgia, but I noticed that the Home Secretary has been talking about Ascension Island. I think the population of Ascension Island won't thank their fellow or won't thank the British government very much necessarily for that, or perhaps they will. I don't know, but my suggestion was Ascension Island is a bit too nice and a bit too far north, but anyway, except South Georgia is an awful lot further. The question is, what would be illegal about doing that? And I'm not sure. Perhaps there is some law that activist lawyers could find to stop the government taking migrants to a British territory, like Ascension Island. I don't see anything wrong with it, though. And I also don't see anything wrong with offering free ferry trips back to France. And it would be difficult to see after a few weeks on Ascension Island. It would be difficult to understand how the French would stop disembarkation. That's one of the difficult things. At the end of in when was it, 1947? One of the last things that my father did in the Navy was go to what was then Palestine, because they were trying to stop the disembarking of boats that were coming from all over the place, the diaspora returning to the Holy Land, and thousands of people often on these boats, and they're trying to stop them disembarking, but you couldn't really. I mean, what are you going to do? Sink migrants? It wasn't done then, and it wouldn't be done now. So I think that if you, after a few weeks on Ascension Island, told migrants that they could now return to France, you might find that they'd be willing to get on the boat bound for France. And then the question is, what would the French do when a ship turned up in, let's say, Marseille to disembark people who, after all, had originally come from France? So they would have done a large round trip back to France, which seems to me to be perfectly reasonable. So I'd like to know what the actual legal objections are to that. But we know that the Home Secretary, I saw a tweet or something this week which showed that the Home Secretary had looked at it and it was being considered. Well, that's a great step forward, and I hope they consider it a lot harder and get busy. When you think that in 82, this country, at very short notice, sent a task force to the Falkland Islands to win a war there. If you set your mind to something, if you want to achieve it, there's no reason. Thank you, my darling. There's no reason why you can't actually be very practical about these things. So that's what I would like to see, a lot more consideration of that option.
I think you're bang on there, but the trouble is we need to do that sooner rather than later. So Priti Patel saying that she can't take any action whilst we're still in the European Union. However, if there isn't agreement between the United Kingdom and the EU, they certainly aren't going to be taking back any illegal economic migrants in any European country, we won't be able to send them back anywhere. So after the 1st of January, we'll be stuck with them. Richard Day, what have you made of it all? Do you think she could have done more?
Well, of course, she could have done a lot more, and it annoys me that we seem to be the only country that ever plays by anybody's rules. I thought we'd given the French money to stop this happening, and I thought that there was supposed to be Secret Service people in amongst the migrant people smugglers. But it's interesting that she banded a few destinations around the Ascension Islands, the Shetlands, the Isle of Wight. Now, I wonder because when she mentioned those places, she mentioned the Isle of Wight as if this is another far off distant place where we could put them all. Now, I wonder if Serco have had a look at the Isle of Wight. I wonder if they've found an old disused military base there, which would be quite handy to put these migrants. It also hasn't escaped my attention that while we're arguing with the French over fishing rights, they seem to be quite happy to allow this flotilla of boats to come in our direction, to dump this problem upon us. It's almost as if they've weaponized it. But as long as they've got people like Serco that are not only in charge of border force, but are also benefiting from the influx, because it's up to them to then house these people, albeit through subcontracting them into hotels or finding disused military bases to put them in. It's a win-win situation for them. And when you look at sort of, who's invested in it and their connections within the Tory party, the whole thing stinks. So she's basically, it's Priti Patel's job to pull the wool and keep talking about it and keep, giving us this carrot of, well, we stick them in the middle of the Atlantic, which would be fantastic, because if they did, if you was an illegal migrant with a mobile phone and you found yourself dumped in the middle of the Atlantic, you'd phone your friends waiting in Calais who are waiting to end up in London to say, look, boys, it's all gone Pete Tong. I'm on the Ascension Islands. I'm stuck in the middle of nowhere. So don't give your $4,000 over to that people smuggler. Try another route. Go back to Germany, Sweden. Try it there. It's just a case. If there's a genuine will, we wouldn't have any of the problems that we're having now. And I was down at Dover a couple of weeks ago, quite recently, and a very good UK activist by the name of Peter Harper made some signs that basically said, why are we housing all these migrants when we've got homeless?
I think we lost you there.
They actually put the camera on so you could just see the pole. And I was on I think they interviewed me for about 3 or 4 minutes, but they showed about 10 seconds of it. I mean, at least they did. Yeah. And I said, we don't know who these people are. They're not all being processed, and a lot of them are just disappearing. So I think it's probably Serco's job to round them up as well, or to find them. It's a bonanza. If you're holding Serco shares and you've got influence over the Conservative government, it's a dream, isn't it? It's an absolute dream for them. So I don't see it ending anytime soon.
Well, I think you're spot on there, mate. And I think, looking at islands, like you just named there, the Isle of Wight, etc. I know she was looking at the Isle of Man. I know at the moment there's approximately 50,000 asylum seeker claims being processed at the moment. That's almost the same size as the population of the Isle of Man. We need to get a grip of it big time, because we're going to end up getting stuck with all these. Like, they ain't going to be going back anywhere. We're having a wall pulled over our eyes. On top of that, we've seen them all in these 4-star hotels, and we're supposed to be in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, what happened to this COVID stuff when it comes to these illegal economic migrants? It seems to have gone out the window. They're coming over in boats of 15, and they're getting in coaches together and heading off. But anyway, whilst we're on a COVID situation, conversation, shall I say, have you seen this footage from the funeral that took place in Milton Keynes? There was a family attending a funeral. 2 sons went to comfort the mother during the ceremony, and a member of the staff from the crematorium told them basically to remove their chairs away from each other and told them to move apart. Absolutely heartbreaking to watch. I don't think, with myself, I wouldn't be putting up with that. Put it that way. But it just goes to show it's gone too far. That's my personal opinion. What do you think of these COVID restrictions we're seeing now in the UK, Richard? Brain?
Yeah, I agree. It's disgraceful. I mean, I think that incident was one, authoritarian having a go, and hopefully most people have got a little bit more discretion than that. But it was a disgrace. I mean, it's really appalling to witness it. I'm really concerned about the actually large number of infirm or old people who've ended up in hospital, completely isolated from friends and family, and unable to have any contact. And I do wonder how many people have gone to their deaths in a sort of, miserable and lonely hell, frankly, without being able to have a few last words with their loved ones. I think that's a terrible tragedy, and I think it's it also raises discussion about children being born, and I think some mothers do like to have their husband there or somebody there. I think it's technically called a birthing partner. And again, I think this has affected all of those things. And yet people are traveling on the underground. People are going to school. People are getting on buses. Isn't it insane, really, that you can get on a bus and stand right next to a stranger, but you can't go into a hospital to visit your 93-year-old dying mother or father? And I think it's just all wrong. There seems to be no perspective. So yeah, everybody's gone rule mad. And I think the other problem is that the numbers now, this idea of a second wave, we're down at whatever the 7-day average of 50 odd deaths, and we don't know how many of those are false positive deaths, because don't forget, the government seems to be more or less refusing to disclose the rate at which false positives occur in the testing. But we're doing about 250,000 tests a day, and if the test false positive rate for those tests is, let's say, something like 2%, which is very likely. PCR tests typically, I understand, are in the sort of range of 1% to 4% for false positives, and that's under normal conditions. Don't forget, we've ramped up production of these tests to such an extent that we could probably expect false positive rate to go up, because there's all sorts of elaborate cleaning materials or cleaning processes used in these in the actual processing of these tests. And so it's quite likely that we do have significant numbers of false positives, and that would produce, let's say, from 250,000 tests in a day, which is what we're doing. You would expect 1% would be, that would be, let's work it out. 1% of 1,000,000 is 10,000, is it? 10,000, something like that. So it's, we're looking at 2,500. So you're looking at probably 5,000 tests a day would come up positive, even if nobody had the disease. So you can expect 5,000 tests a day coming up positive when the disease didn't even exist. And yet we see these numbers constantly put forward by the government. Oh, look, there's 5,000, there's 6,000 tests have come up positive, with no acknowledgement that that's what you would expect to see, more or less, if the disease didn't exist. So why are we calling this an epidemic? In those circumstances. And not only that, but if you have one of these tests and you come up positive, and some people are mooting a 90% proportion of false tests. So maybe only as many as 10% of those positive tests indicate real cases. And you have people defined as dying of COVID if they've had a positive test in the last month, then you're going to get a lot of people dying who will be written down as COVID death victims, even though they only ever had a false positive test. And that's the only indication of connection between them and the disease. So right now, I mean, and this does explain why we're not seeing we're seeing a huge leap in the number of cases detected, but that's because we've hugely increased the number of tests, or may partly or mainly be due to the very rapid increase in the number of tests. But what we haven't really been seeing is a commensurate spike in the death rates, and this can literally be explained by the idea that a great many of the cases that are being put forward are false positives due to the small percentage of tests that come out positive from PCR. So that's my view, that I would really love to hear from the government what exactly is the false positive rate, and then look at the figures once that's been deducted from the case rate, so that we can really see how many people do have it, what the penetration is into the population of the disease right now, and to what, how many deaths can be attributed to that.
Okay, well, I don't know if any of you saw the Kay Burley interview with Matt Hancock a few days ago, and I don't quote me on it, but I think the suggested number of false positives was about 30%, and Kay Burley put this to Matt Hancock. He completely stonewalled the question. He answered a completely different question to the one she'd answered, and she had him on it again, and she said no. She said, Mr. Hancock, it could be as many as a third of the people have been false positive, and he just completely stonewalled the question. Now,
Richard, what frightened me about that interview? I mean, first of all, it's alarming enough that we're seeing Kay Burley being a champion of openness, which is frightening in itself. But the other frightening thing about that interview was that I got the feeling from Matt Hancock's reaction that he didn't really understand the question. I mean, I was amazed, and I've seen this quite a lot with politicians and people are providing these opinions on this. They don't seem to understand that if you've got a 2% false positive rate, and you test 250,000 people in a day, you're going to get 10,000 positives even when no one's got it. They don't seem to understand that.
Well, I don't.
5,000. I'll give you 5,000. But still, they don't seem to recognise that the false positive rate could account for the overwhelming majority of cases that the tests are supposed to be detecting. And none of the ministers and the only person, Dominic Raab, was interviewed in another interview, which is completely at odds with the Hancock interview that you've just mentioned. And in that one, he said that I think it was something amazing statistic he gave, like, for instance, that something like 7% of tests were correct. I mean, some incredibly low statistic. It didn't quite make sense to me. I'm not sure I believe it. But I mean, what you're saying about 30% seems perfectly realistic. If you've got a test where under normal conditions, the false positive rate would be between 1% and 4%, and you then say, right, we're going to process 250,000 of these a day, ramp it up, get every Tom, Dick and Harry into the facility here to be running, to processing these tests, because they've all got to be processed with fluids. I don't know how it's done, but with equipment and fluids and God knows what, it's a complicated process. And so if you do that, you can expect the false positive rate to jump enormously. So 30% seems to me to be perfectly plausible. And if it's 30%, then almost none of the cases that are coming up positive in the tests are actually COVID cases. Do we have COVID cases? Yes, clearly we do. But there's the other thing that doesn't get talked about is the false negative rate. If you've got these false positives happening at that rate, you're also going to have people with the disease getting a test that comes up negative. It's inevitable. And I'd like to know what that rate is too, because that's people getting tested who've got the disease. The test tells them, no, you haven't got it. And then they go out to a party, they go out to a pub, whatever. They meet someone new who comes from a family of 8. And Bob's your uncle. You've got, we really need to know what these rates are.
I'll tell you what. Sorry to interrupt you, Richard, but I'm really running out of patience in trying to work out what's going on now. Can this government be so inclined to keep repeatedly getting on time after time, or is it being perpetuated to introduce a new agenda? Now, We are being subjected every day, whether you go for a pint, piss, get on a bus, get on a train, go in a coffee bar, go to the shops, to this neuro-linguistic programming. It is relentless. You turn the radio on between every ad break, especially if you're unfortunate enough to tune into LBC accidentally, and you get it there repeatedly. Now, this appears to be another industry which if you're in the know, you'd be well invested in. We are living in a pharmacracy. We have got this Matt Hancock, who's basically a spiv representing the pharmaceutical companies, Bill Gates Foundation, their appointed lecturers, their government advisors, who seem to be unquestioningly listened to, no matter how many times they cock it up, no matter what they do to this economy. Now, I don't know if any of you heard the Boris Johnson address to the Tory conference today, where he basically just painted this picture of this new world, the brave new Aldous Huxley turnout. He slipped in a couple of phrases. One of them was "build back better." He said that 3 times. He supplanted that phrase 3 times. Now that phrase has already been used by Joe Biden twice in the speeches that he's been doing. Build back better. So I believe this is the economic reset, and that's what they're taking us towards. And they're perpetuating this every time it looks like we flatten a curve. There's another curve. There's another wave. There's another reason to be fearful. There's another reason to keep the masks on. Although when you hear counter arguments from well-respected scientists that keep telling the government they're getting it all wrong. Somebody was interviewed on the Andrew Neil show earlier this week. She's the end of last week. She's a world-renowned virologist, completely different. Had a completely different idea of how to tackle this from what the government are imposing upon us. We are living in a time where I never thought I'd see this happen, and there just doesn't seem to be any end to it. Now, when Boris Johnson made this speech today to the conference, he also mentioned, as well as talking about wind farms, electric cars, he did use the word electric ID. Now, electric ID, he also spoke of very low deposit mortgages for young people, to give them a chance to have an investment in a capitalist society, basically, which they feel excluded from. But I'm wondering whether there's going to be a caveat to this, whether you'll be able to, you can have the 95% never-ending mortgage, a bit like what they have in Japan, but have you had the vaccine? Because if you haven't had the vaccine and you're not a responsible citizen, well, maybe we can't quite help you out yet. I was also reading an article on Zero Hedge about a device, like a small electrode that you can insert, which also measures your the toxins in your body and any influenza or any COVID disease, and it almost like goes off like an alarm. Now they reckon that's coming down the track. There are all sorts of impositions that are going to be placed upon us. Now, I do remember during the last election, I won't bang on too long, but this is the grip that some companies have over political parties. I do remember the puberty blocking drug firm sponsoring the Lib Dems when they had their pansexual leader, and they were the ones that were leading the way, sexualizing children and getting children to question their gender, whether they're in the right body, whether in the right fit. It didn't work out for them. Most people saw through it. But I think now what we've got is a conservative government where the leading players are basically being bought and sold by the pharma industry, because that's what we seem to be doing every week. There's an announcement from somebody from the pharmaceutical world. Why? Why have I got to have a picnic? You can't walk down the street without some continue which way you've got to walk. And going into a shop, I went into a pub in Kent a little while ago, and I had to be I'd told to go backwards again because I'd walked along the wrong dotted line, and and I'd already got to the bar. She only had to say, sorry, love, next time you come in, could you walk around that way? And I said to you, what we could do with people like you down at Dover, because you actually you actually seem to be getting off on this, you know. And there's a lot of these sort of rainbow children that are working in these pubs now, with their desk and with their clipboard and with their bottle of hand sanitizer, and it's no, no, no. And the great British tradition of going out, you know, a pub in a hospitable environment like that and enjoying yourself, it's just gone. You know, it's just, and this government's behind it. I went out for a drink with my brother the other day, and it got to about 20 to 10, and the barman started giving us out paper cups, and I said, well, what are these for? He started putting paper cups on the table because he could see we had still most of our pints left, and he said, oh no, you might want to pour them in the cup because you'll have to go at 5 to 10. So these are basic. It was pouring with rain outside.
He wasn't asking you for a urine sample.
Well, this idiot, basically, that's where we are now. These kids that are running pubs are basically giving you a paper cup for you to pour your beer in and drink it outside on the way home. I mean, this is where we're going. It's crazy.
One thing
It's
that
very difficult to not get involved with it. You know, when you were like, I think personally, my personal opinion is, I think this is a load of bollocks. I think it's the biggest load of bollocks that we've seen for a long time. It's just like the death rate of it's like is minute, and I think we're worrying over nothing really. However, you know, I run a security company. I have to supply door staff to pubs across London, and we're getting it in the ear roll from like the likes of yourself and probably the likes of myself. You turn up and say, well, you've got to put your face mask on when you go into the pub. But when you sit down, you can take your face mask off. But when you get up to go for a wee, you need to put your face mask back on. If you go to play a game of pool, you got to put your face mask back on. And it causes so much conflict. It's unbelievable. And we've had so many people that have been, you know, sound as a pound for a long time. Now with these, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that. People are getting really wound up about it. It's very hard to
be fair, David. David, to be fair, doormen at clubs and nightclubs and pubs have always, or at least some of them, have always behaved like little Nazis. Let's be honest.
Well, yeah, you get good and bad in everyone, Richard. But at the end of the day, like I said, I think it's a load of bollocks, but I have to implement it. And I have to make sure that the rules stay in place. Because if you don't, the business gets a £10,000 fine. A £10,000 fine.
I totally understand and I totally sympathise. I wouldn't want to lose my business. I wouldn't want a £10,000 fine. I mean, you know, fines are being imposed. You know, one of the worst things for people's immune system is stress. If you're in a stressful environment. Now, I was somebody who refused to wear a mask anywhere on the tube. You know, I still barely, I sort of hold it near my face and I take it off the nearest opportunity. But I've noticed now that there's been a few coppers when I walk through Charing Cross, there have been a few really sort of screwing me. I just think that guy saw me yesterday as well, you know. So I've been a little bit more of a good citizen and compliant, because the thing is, you're thinking, am I going to have any work next month? And if I haven't got any work next month, or the month after that, or the month, or, you know, Christmas, you know, we're looking at this not being sorted out this side of Christmas. Do I want to get hit with a £3,200 fine? Which is what you're seeing in the train stations now as part of the neuro-linguistic programming. You're never going to be allowed to forget this. However, I think that if I was running a business, I would put some demonstrative indication up, some sign somewhere next to the barcode that you're supposed to scan in, and I would basically say, dear customers, please understand that this is not my imposition. This is I've got this up because the government are going to fine me if I don't. These are the times we're living in. Please work with us. It's not, you know, whatever the name of the pub is, it's not to do with the staff or the management of the King's Arms or wherever it is. But this is being imposed upon us. And I think if all this ever ends and conveying that, I think they'll get, you know, be rewarded with more business if this ever stops. However, there are some businesses where the staff seem to be getting off on it. They really do seem to have be enjoying this newfound authority, like I experienced in the pub that I went to. You know, people, you've got to realise, what do people go to pubs for? You go to relax and socialise. And that's changed. The environment has changed, and God knows, you know, they've got.
Did you see these, Richard? Did you see these 5 lads, welders, who got imprisoned in the Isle of Man for going into a shop or something because they weren't allowed to go to the shop to buy chicken sandwiches, and by breaking the curfew, I don't know how they were shopped and arrested, but they were done for it.
Yeah, that's the thing, Richard. You see, that was it. You know, it was a phone call. Someone rang up. They said that, you know, they're obviously not locals. They weren't. I think, if I remember rightly, I think it was only key workers that were allowed to go out or whatever. And obviously they weren't, and they were wearing face masks, and they don't have that implemented in the Isle of Man, so they knew that they weren't locals or key workers. And someone grasped them up. But that's what we're seeing now. We're even seeing it from our government saying, if you see your neighbour, if they've got people around their house more than 6, get on the phone and give us a call. Like, call the old bill. We're turning into a nation of grasses.
There's something else I wanted to bring up a few minutes ago as a result of something that Richard said. And that's this, that as I understand it, one of the vaccines being put forward by Gates / Fauci is some kind of essentially novel, previously untested RNA modification material, which actually changes, as I understand it, changes your genetic code. So it uses RNA to change some part of the of your genetic code, and it essentially it's equivalent to genetic modification. And what I'm interested in is how many of the people that are up in arms about GM crops and GM foods and all of that will knowingly and willfully walk into a vaccination parlor like livestock in order to have GM done to them, even though they wouldn't allow GM foods to be imported and sold to eat in this country. And I'm quite concerned about that. And it seems to me that you know, one of the dispensations for vaccines is that they're so urgent or so difficult to test properly or whatever it is, that they have a sort of dispensation where there's the firms that roll out vaccines, certainly in the US, are not, or they can't be held liable. They can't be held responsible for what the vaccines do legally subsequently, and that's quite a dangerous situation. It looks to me as though some of these firms are seeing this as an opportunity to roll out technologies that are somewhat untested. And I've seen one or two physicians online complaining about this and saying that it's madness to roll out brand new and largely untested vaccine technologies in this situation because of the urgency, because big mistakes will be made. And I'm not generally an anti-vaxxer. You know, in the 20th century, vaccines essentially eradicated 20 of the world's most lethal diseases. And one of the reasons why we have a population explosion on Earth is because the 20th century vaccination program was so successful and saved so many lives and caused populations to grow vastly. If you look at, let's say, Yemen, its population was, I think, about 5 million 30, 40 years ago, and it's now 25 million. That's one country multiplying population 5-fold. And vaccination has played a big part in that. So, you know, I'm not generally an anti-vaxxer. There obviously have been vaccines that have been had appalling effects, and so I think, you know, it's not a black and white situation, but it seems to me the danger here is that there's such pressure on producing a vaccine, and they seem to be so willing to throw out caution and the usual rules that apply to this, that I think I genuinely am worried about a vaccine and what kind of thing it is and whether it has negative side effects. And I'm also very worried that it's going to be compulsory. And you touched on this earlier, David, that they're going to use all kinds of methods of coercion to force people to have these vaccines. And, you know, it's maybe there will grow up a black market in fake vaccine certification so that you can not have the vaccine and pretend you have in order to get access to insurance or whatever else it is. But I'm worried about that. Now, the problem is that, you know, anybody who expresses this kind of concern is going to be labeled as an anti-vaxxer. And that is another way of saying, oh, a truther, a flat earther, they never landed on the moon. And we're all going to be thrown in this basket of being conspiracy nut jobs. When in fact, it does seem that the situation is worrying and ordinary people ought to be worried about it.
I won't be getting any vaccine. They can stick the vaccine up their arses. Like, if they make it compulsory, I definitely won't be taking any vaccine. I mean, hopefully Donald Trump, he's been in hospital, what is it, 3-4 days, he's out on a couple of meds, no mention of any vaccine. So fingers crossed. You were talking about this to me a couple of days ago, Richard Day, saying, hopefully he comes out on top of it, and just shows the world it's a farce.
By the way, can I just mention that, Richard, you mentioned an interview with Andrew Neil. I think the academic you were talking about, was it Sunetra Gupta?
Yes.
Who's Oxford epidemiologist.
Yeah.
And she's very interesting and has considerable scientific authority and doesn't toe the line or say the right things at all, and well worth looking up and reading what she has to say, I think.
Yeah, that was the I've seen her on YouTube as well before she did the Andrew Neil, but there are many others. I was at the Trafalgar Square demo the other day, and that shows you where we really are, because I saw the police behave in the way that they did when a German doctor came on stage, who's a well-respected German doctor, and there's been much bigger demonstrations in Germany. I think he's spoken a lot of those, and somebody who we all know, Liz Phillips, got knocked over in the melee. There was you saw the elderly lady get dragged off the chair. That even the Daily Mail showed that the police dragged her off, and a policeman shoved her in the stomach. You compare this to other demonstrations, and it's this the anti-vaxxer label that you've already mentioned. I mean, I was going to say that because it's if you're anti-BLM, you're a racist. If you're anti this new COVID solution, you're an anti-vaxxer. That's it. You completely disagree with it, and that is the language being perpetuated by the representatives of the pharmaceutical industry. So it's inescapable. It's absolutely that they've lit up the pathways of where you stand, and it's about being a good citizen or a bad citizen. If you're a bad citizen, you're going to call the Black Lives Matter mob a race baiters, and you're not on board with them. So there's obviously something wrong with you there. And if you're not prepared to accept this experimental vaccine, which has got no liability attached to it, the pharmaceutical business companies have got a complete free rein on it. So are their investors. You can't go wrong. You absolutely, for something to be this unregulated and being, imposed on us so quickly when there are numerous other causes of death rates. It's about 10th or 12th at the moment. That's if you believe the figures. And of course, you will only hear certain people on the media talking about women that are missing their mammograms and smear tests, and men that are not getting treated for prostate, all of those things. And what's that going to cost? What the ramifications for that are going to be like? And how much of those illnesses are being exacerbated by the fact that we are living in this horrible, stressful environment now, where you might want to sort of phone a couple of friends up and go and have a chat with them in the pub about it, like you would have done a few months ago. And that now is interfered with by this. Have you got, you've got to have an argument with the bloke on the door. I pretend that I haven't got a smartphone. I go in the pub, no, sorry, mate, I can't scan now. I haven't got a smartphone. My phone's not compatible. So what do you want? So you give them the phone number.
I have a better solution. I write my name down as Matt Hancock, and I think the number is 01284336699. That's his constituency office.
Nice one.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. But you're so on the money there. They just don't get it, and for the left, they're so programmed they can't hear anyone else's argument. As you mentioned there, with the protest, there is a completely different policing tactics. we saw with Black Lives Matter. You know, they stood back, they let them congregate in the thousands whilst they were, you know, vandalising war memorials and statues. Let them crack on. We saw the same with the Extinction Rebellion. You know, all breaking social distancing rules was fine. But I saw down there at Trafalgar Square that there was a completely different style of policing, as we saw with the veterans that went to protect the war memorials after they were vandalised by Black Lives Matter. So it's one rule for one and one rule for another.
How do those coppers feel being told to do that? You know, do they feel good about, you know, coming home from their day at the office, having punched an old lady in the stomach? Do they feel good about that? I mean, are they so trained? Is it like there's a separate bunch of coppers that are trained for riot activity and maximum aggression is the order of the day? Or you know, are they normal coppers who, you know, who actually have to follow orders and look at what they're doing and think, why the hell am I doing this?
Yeah, again, I think there are coppers that are enjoying it, and there are coppers that do it with greater reluctance. I saw some coppers waving their batons around. You could tell that they had no intention of hitting anybody with them. They were sort of waving it around, you know, in a way, sort of get back. I don't know what the police recruitment policy is now. I don't know how malleable and suggestible you have to be to jump through the common purpose loops that the people that are running our police services now set out for them. But there were the few that were enjoying the violence, and whether they've sold it to themselves that if we don't nip this in the bud, they'll all be demonstrating on the streets, and then COVID will spread everywhere, and then we really will have an epidemic that will be unstoppable. Or whether they're just thugs, and I think they are just thugs. But I will say this: it wasn't just. There were people there. The good, refreshing thing about this demonstration, I mean, once you go on a few demonstrations, you get to see the type of people that are always demonstrating. They'll be demonstrating about one thing or another. It's almost like a weekly episode for them. But there were people at Trafalgar Square, and I think a lot of them would have been sort of left or centre left minded, probably as appalled with the Corbyn the direction that he took the Labour Party in as any of us were, but ironically, it was Jeremy Corbyn's brother who was one of the speakers at the event. But there were people there, just typical, just the most ordinary, everyday families who have seen through it. Their businesses are being trashed. They're getting, you know, there was one bloke that was interviewed by a citizen journalist, and he said he'd been a successful chef for quite a long time. The hospitality industry has finished. It was the first demonstration he's been on. He's got enough money to pay his rent for the next 2 months, but after November, he's going to run out of cash. And there's a skilled bloke that was, you know, working quite successfully, bopping along, and earning a good wage. There's, you know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people like him in this situation with nowhere to turn, and they're seeing through this government so-called incompetence. I've got to say, I don't think the government are being incompetent at all. I think this is deliberate. This is deliberate, and I think they're heading. If you kept taking your car back to the same garage to have an exhaust pipe done, and they done your exhaust, but you know they put the wrong oil in it, and then when you took it back because they put the wrong oil in it, they changed the spark plugs and didn't set the spark plugs up properly, and then when they done that, you know, you went back again and they, you know, the brake fluid was leaking. In the end, you would just think, I think these mechanics have got it in for me, because they're interfering and changing tacks and doing things that didn't need to be done. That were, you know, not going to stop the problems that I've got with this car. And it's the same thing. Don't forget, you know, it's supposed to be the economy, stupid. You know, that's supposed to be the keynote for a successful political party. Keep people in work.
Answer me this. So it's a very interesting question, but I think that when it comes to things like governments, you although governments and large organizations are made up of individuals, when it comes to, for example, a government, I think it's reasonable to say that regardless of whether it's incompetence or malice, it amounts to the same thing. It's inadequate, and it needs to be punished, corrected, whatever it is. Get rid of them. But the problem here is this: we've just heard yesterday that the government track and trace scheme, which it requisitioned for £12 billion of taxpayers' money, as I understand it, has at its centre an Excel spreadsheet. And this is a level of Ludditism and incompetence that is unimaginable. I don't know the extent to which that story is true, but what I do find odd is this. Dominic Cummings is supposed to be the, a serious advisor to Johnson. And the question I have is this. During the referendum, Cummings got a group of physicists in, supposedly, or that's what he bragged on his blog, to write custom software for Vote Leave, including VIX, the Voter Intention Collection System, which was really named after one of the staff there at Vote Leave. And after the referendum, he actually published that software as open source code for everybody to download and use. And what I find unimaginable is that a government that has an advisor, senior advisor like that, who is so openly devoted to the tech revolution, which he is, can get itself into the situation where 12 billion of public money is being spent on something that has an Excel spreadsheet at its core. How did that happen? What does Dominic Cummings think about the Excel spreadsheet? To what extent is that story true? Any ideas, any insights on that?
No, I mean, I've only read that in the mainstream media. Again, the stories that hit the mainstream media, the leaked story as it was, we're told what they want us to hear, and I think this is we're seeing another level of psyop now from the government. The best one I've seen, that I've been aware of, has been the ones where we was all, most of the people, and I must admit, I did it myself once, was out on their doors at 8 o'clock bashing their pans for the NHS. And then we all went back into our prisons and shut the door. That was fantastic. Whoever designed that one, Goebbels would have absolutely been jumping for joy in his grave at the.
It's Milgram's. We've got to bring up Milgram's experiment, which I don't know if the two of you are aware of it. He was
electric shock.
Yeah, I think he was a psychologist, and he devised an experiment to see how many volunteers picked randomly from the campus or on the street would help a scientist to administer a lethal electric shock to someone in an experiment. And he would wear a white lab coat, and he'd say, "Look, we're testing this person to see the effects of stress and electric shock on people." And there would be a screen so that the assistant wouldn't be able to see the victim. But they would ask a question, and the chap would get it right. That's fine. And when he got a question wrong, Milgram, the scientist with the white lab coat, would say, "Right, we'll turn it up another 100 volts and press the stun button." And the dial was clearly labelled with a red zone up at the top that was labelled lethal dose or potentially lethal dose or lethal shock. And Milgram would say, "No, don't worry, it's fine. Just turn it up and press the button. It's all right." And what he found was that 63% of volunteers, more or less randomly selected, would do what the man in the white coat said and turn the dial up to lethal and press the button, even though they could hear the screaming and yowling of an actor, as it in fact turned out to be, behind the screen, pretending to be getting these electric shocks, because a light would come on as soon as the button would press, and he would start his screaming. And 63%, I think, of people were prepared to go lethal. And this is, I think this experiment was supposed to have been done in the wake of the Nuremberg trials of prison guards in the Third Reich, and the way they behaved and the way they tried to refer their responsibility to their orders. But I think that this does have an influence on what we're seeing at the moment. We're seeing very, very strong messaging and strong signaling coming from the establishment, the government, the press, the schools, the universities, all the institutions. We're seeing a very, very clear directive being delivered. And it's amazing how many people, and often what surprises me is I come across people that I thought better of. I thought they were independent thinkers. I thought they were people who weighed carefully and sifted the information they were given and the directives they were given by institutions or authority, and weighed it up and took it with a pinch of salt when appropriate. And what I've realized in the last 6 months is that actually the number of people that do stop and think and question and challenge and try to understand cui bono, try to understand the motives of those telling us to behave in certain ways, those people are few and far between. I'm lucky, I know lots of them because of the last 5 years and being associated with great people like you two, and all of the great patriots in this country who voted to leave. But I think that there is, even amongst the leavers, there is a high percentage of people who actually do just do what they're told in the Milgram style, who do believe what they're told, and who do accept the directives as they stand, even if they don't make much sense.
There are many people who don't believe in it, and many people think it's a load of rubbish. And I think there's going to be a lot of backlash over this, and we're going to see some serious resistance if it continues and more businesses go under. We just see the Cineworld collapse across the UK and the US. That's about 45,000 jobs that have just been lost. We've seen airlines have been cutting jobs. We've seen the hospitality business, as you mentioned, hotels have been closing down, cutting their staff, retaking on a small number of staff on with minute hours in their contracts, with clauses, get out clauses, so they can get rid of people when they like. I think if this continues, we're going to see some serious backlash from all this.
But is civil disobedience possible anymore, David? Is civil disobedience possible? Because we live in a surveillance state now that is frankly gone beyond what George Orwell described in 1984. The ability of the state to surveil today is much more than he described. And so
stay out there with his pickaxe handle. Come on.
I mean, the problem is that they know you're going to do it before you even think of it, and this is why the concentration of power, and particularly data power, in the hands of government, to the extent that it has happened, is such a dangerous thing, because it does produce a monocultural establishment which exerts absolute power over the people. And you look at the Brexit vote and you wonder if that wasn't the last hurrah for freedom. So I'm worried. I think the absence of a political party that represents that is genuinely an opposition is there are many. They are small. Hardly anybody votes for them. And unfortunately, they do not attract, they do not attract a lot of big hitters. And so the problem is, that absence of a political party that represents us is very, very worrying to me. And I don't know how to address that. And, I do sometimes wonder whether the answer isn't for a group of people like Momentum to attempt to infiltrate the existing major political parties and do them over.
Richard,
yeah, well, it was encouraging when I was at Trafalgar Square, because you saw the appetite there, but it's also crossed my mind whether this, because they're doing this so clumsily and unconvincingly, because if you think we're the only three people that are having this conversation, I mean, we there are far more people that are having this skeptical conversation than people who are compliantly bopping along with it, because I think everybody's accent. I think the globalists now are seeing what can happen if they lose control, or they don't control us properly, in inverted commas. We will have a movement, a Brexit. It will take hold. People will see the injustice of what's being imposed upon them, what they didn't vote for. So I believe the globalists are not going to let that happen again, or they're determined not to. Hence, Boris Johnson today, when he slipped in about the electronic identification, He did say that. He did say that in his speech. And I put the radio on afterwards to see if anybody would pick up on it. And they didn't. They say picked up about the cars and the electric vehicles and the wind farms, etc., etc. But nobody picks up on that now. If we're going to do something, we've got to do it now. But when I was at Trafalgar Square, I just thought, because I've been to 2 demos there now, and the second one was a lot bigger than the first one. And, as it started filtering down to Pall Mall, I just thought to myself, you could get 50,000 people to block the gates of Parliament, to block every entrance of Parliament, and tell the government, you're not coming out. You're not coming out until you stop this lockdown nonsense. We're going to cause a scene. There's going to be a big scene. You are going to have to get your 77 Brigade thugs who are masquerading as police officers. You're going to have to get them out. You're going to have some ugly scenes. You're going to have to show your brutality and your true intent to stop this. Because, without sounding too Ikeish, we are the many. We are the 99.99%. And they are the very, very few. And it's just a case of encouraging public courage. Because there were a lot of courageous people in Trafalgar Square a couple of weeks ago, on stage and off stage, and a lot of people sat on the floor. They obstructed the police when they were swinging their batons around, and a few people even turned on the police. Now, I'm not advocating violence, but I think if we overdo the politeness, if we listen too carefully to our good-natured conscience, and don't do enough, and don't nip this in the bud, there's going to be no going back, because we're going to have a sort of in a couple of generations' time, we're going to have sort of semi-Android kids. It's bad enough now how they're willing to be completely dictated to by their smartphones. And and again, I go back to the pub analogy. But the guy wanted me to look at the menu on my app, order a drink on the app. Can't you pay for it by your phone? It's a generation of people that haven't lived without one. And the idea of me, going to all the inconvenience of asking him for a pay, can I have money out of my pocket and pay you for the food that you're going to serve me, was all a bit too much. They wanted it another way, and I think this has infected millions and millions of people. I went to Covent Garden yesterday, saw them all queuing up outside the Apple store to have the latest device, because they need that in their life, that appetite to not have the old version. They've got to have the updated version, and they've got to be on the cusp of every new bit of surveillance that's designed and developed to basically track them down, anticipate what they're going to do, and basically control them. And that's where we've got an appetite for control.
What proportion of people do you think have signed up to the Track and Trace app? Do you think that's penetrated at all?
Do you know what I've seen? With the app.
Really, yeah. I think the younger generation will.
Yeah.
I think the younger people are quite happy with it. I think it's become such a big part of their lives now that they turn around and look at me moaning at the bloke on the door, saying, mate, I just want to come here and have a drink without all this nonsense. And they probably know I'm pretending that I haven't got a smartphone. And they look around and they tut, say, why don't you just download the app? It couldn't be simpler. Why can't you just do that? They're trying to make it easy for you, but you're putting a headwind in the way of progress. And we all know what progress means, don't we?
Well, we're heading towards a totalitarian communist state by the looks of it and the sounds of everything. Unless we all start fighting back soon, that's like you said, within a couple of generations we'll be there with all this 5G, instant technology. They're going to know exactly where you are, what you're doing, and there won't be any time for any resistance, will there?
Absolutely.
Guys, I'm gonna have to cut it there because we're reaching an hour. Before we go, Richard Brain, would you like to have the last word?
I want to bring to people's attention the short speech that Donald Trump gave when he came out of hospital, and it was full of courage and it was full of optimism, and I sincerely hope that he is re-elected in November. And I think that those characteristics are something that we need to cling on to and make the most of and recognize them where they are. And he has them in abundance. And so I'm hoping that there'll be a Trump win. that we'll see Brexit delivered partly as a result of that, because we know that he is a supporter of national independence. And so that's it. Courage and optimism is what I want to say. Watch what Trump said when he came out of hospital. He took off his mask and triggered millions of completely brainwashed lefties who saw that as some kind of sacrilegious action. But he took off his mask and he preached about courage and strength and optimism and the future and energy and doing things right. So that's all I want to say.
I'll stick that video to the end of this one, so people can have a look at that. Richard, Dave, thanks very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Good to see you both.
It's good to be you. And likewise, Richard Brain, thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Thanks for watching.
Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and comment below. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
I just left Walter Reed Medical Center, and it's really something very special. The doctors, the nurses, the first responders, and I learned so much about coronavirus. And one thing that's for certain, don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it. You're going to beat it. We have the best medical equipment. We have the best medicines, all developed recently. And you're going to beat it. I didn't feel so good. And 2 days ago, I could have left 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I felt great, like better than I have in a long time. I said just recently, better than 20 years ago. Don't let it dominate. Don't let it take over your lives. Don't let that happen. We have the greatest country in the world. We're going back. We're going back to work. We're going to be out front. As your leader, I had to do that. I knew there's danger to it, but I had to do it. I stood out front. I led. Nobody that's a leader would not do what I did. And I know there's a risk, there's a danger, but that's okay. And now I'm better, and maybe I'm immune. I don't know. But don't let it dominate your lives. Get out there. Be careful. We have the best medicines in the world, and it all happened very shortly, and they're all getting approved, and the vaccines are coming momentarily. Thank you very much. And Walter Reed, what a group of people. Thank you very much.